So howdy, I'm Mitch Wettle. I am a former cooper at the Brown-Forman Cooperage here in Louisville, Kentucky. Former distillery supervisor at Heaven Hill, also in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm a level 3 whiskey sommelier, and currently I am a member of My Whiskey Den on YouTube, and we're a part of the Bar Cart Co-op. I have a really backwards story about how I got passionate about bourbon, because I did not drink until I was 21. And the first drink I ever had was a Warsteiner beer, and I thought it was terrible. And I drank about a third of it, and I was like, no, I don't really see the point in this. And then I got a job in retail, and I understood why people drink. So suddenly I became much more passionate about drinking in general, not just bourbon. So I worked in retail for a long time. And my ticket out of it was actually my father. He got a job at the Brown-Forman Cooperage. He and my mom were both forestry majors at UK. And he got me a job there. And they gave us $200 a year to spend on Brown-Forman products. So I was like, well, I've got $200 free dollars. I'm going to spend $200 free dollars. And I went out and I bought a bottle of Old Forester 86. And I was like, this is going to be my special occasion bottle. Because up until then, when you work retail, like $8 an hour was a lot. So suddenly I was making more than $8 an hour, and I could afford to spend more than $15 a bottle on alcohol. So I tried it and I really liked it. I was like, oh wow, this bourbon stuff is actually pretty good. And started buying more of those Brown-Forman products, using up that money, and found out I really liked bourbon and just spiraled from there. Getting in at the cooperage, the best thing about that job was it was my introduction to the bourbon world. So a lot of people want to break into the bourbon world, and it's not super hard to do, especially if you live in Kentucky. If you live in Kentucky, you can do it. I worked there for 4 years. I made a lot of barrels. Hopefully not many of them leaked. And that really started this, right? So that's amazing. I will say working at a cooperage is not fun. Barrels weigh 100 pounds. You move them. You also work next to open flames because those barrels have to be charred, so it gets hot. So it is not a romantic notion of a guy wearing, a clean apron with draw knives, very carefully caressing this barrel into a perfect shape. It is his manufacturing work with, before they updated, OSHA semi-approved things that, are loud and hot. And then when I worked at Heaven Hill, I learned a lot about simultaneously the actual business of distilling and kind of what that entails. Because for the heritage brands and things like that, it is not about the master distiller walking through fields of grain, choosing individual ears of corn or anything like that. It's about producing a consistent product that consumers want and being able to do that in the quantity they need and at the price they want. And that's a wake-up call. To people who romanticize like me, who romanticize the notion of distilling bourbon. And that, although it was dream shattering, it was so amazing to learn, just because it's better to know the truth than it is to, kind of live the lie. And I will always appreciate them for that. And then for my whiskey den, I just love hanging out with Pat and Mike. Like, if it wasn't on YouTube, I would still do it, right? I would just drink online with them and then talk about stuff. That's what I love about bourbon. So I joke a lot of times the worst thing about bourbon is the people, but the best thing about bourbon is the people. You run into a lot of people that make you think, wow, I hope I never did that. And then you run into a lot of people that you're like, you are the best thing about humanity. I wish there were more of you. And Pat and Mike are obviously the latter category, and do what you love. If I got to live my dream, I would be what Michter's calls a master of maturation. Just basically the person who kind of directs their aging program, right? So Michter's has toasted barrel, you know, they have barrel strength, they have their traditional offerings, and all of those take a lot of management, right? You can't necessarily just put bourbon in barrels and hope for the best. You have to know where you're putting it, conditions they're under, you know, toast levels, char levels, locations in the rick house, locations of the rick house in the country, what the weather's gonna do to it, all that fun stuff. And it sounds, to me, incredibly interesting and just romantic, and I would love to just dig my teeth into it and, you know, really start dissecting it and, you know, trying to create the best blend I could, right? But realistically, I'd love to just be on YouTube with my friends. Like, I'm doing that right now. That's what I enjoy. That's why I'm doing it. But something in the middle would be pretty cool too, where you get to be involved in the industry again, preferably in maturation, just because that's what I like. But, you know, the whole industry is amazing. So bourbon's really weird in the category of whiskey, right? For Americans, it seems pretty normal to say, okay, this has to be at least this percentage corn, must be a new barrel, must be, you know, to be straight, it's got to be, you know, so old. But other than that, no real rules. And that is wildly different than every other country. So, right, like Scotland and Ireland have age requirements. Bourbon doesn't. You can put out a 2-second-old bourbon. And people have. Like, you can put out, you know, ancient bourbon. And it does taste like gnawing on a tree, but you can. As opposed to, you know, a lot of other things that are older. But being as invested as I am in just kind of maturation and oak casks and all that fun stuff. To me, what really makes bourbon shine is corn is so sweet. And if you balance it with new oak well, it sings. You can get those sweet and savory notes, right? That just, I'm salivating right now thinking about, you know, like salty and sweet or savory and sweet. If you do it well, you have found something that no other whiskey can do. Like malt can be sweet, normally when it's put in a sherry cask, and that's very different sweetness. You know, rye can be sweet, especially if you malt the rye. It's a different sweetness from corn, though. A lot of the grain in Scotland is wheat now, and that's a very different sweetness. And you know, there's just something unique about corn sweetness balanced against oak that is absolutely delicious. So I think America's much different than the rest of the world, because we really tout up the master distiller, and a lot of the rest of the world is, you know, it's all about blends, especially Scotland. Like, the amount of Scotch that is sold as a single malt as opposed to a blend is tiny. I think it's a little bit about how Americans are programmed. We're a very agrarian, pull yourself up by, you know, your own bootstraps type of country. So the person who was actually making things for a long time was, you know, paramount in kind of the eyes of the Puritans, you know, back in the day. Like, what are you doing? I am making something. I am physically bettering the world by creating something within it. Also, recently, right, everybody's heard of Blanton's single barrel. It's the first single barrel. Whether or not that's true, like, it's a great, amazing campaign. Like, they have sold more whiskey than they can sell based off of that. And you can't tell the master blender when you're selling single barrels. So I think it's kind of one of those weird things where just kind of the way our country is versus other countries, we really, you know, like to say, you know, like God bless the farmer because he's growing the food. God bless, the maker because he's making the things, as opposed to God bless like the artist who's blending the whiskey to taste good. If you said God bless the artist in parts of America, you would probably be stared at very, very oddly. So I don't necessarily think that bourbon is unique in its ability to bring folks together. I think it is a delicious food. And I don't think anything brings people together quite like food. Like, you can meet some of the worst people you've ever met in your life who think some of the worst things they've ever thought about certain groups of people, but they'll eat at their restaurant. To me, that's bourbon, right? There is something about sharing food, or in this case, a drink with someone that bridges those gaps. Bourbon just happens to be an utterly delicious alcoholic drink only made in America instead of, a Mexican restaurant or, a Chinese restaurant or a soul food restaurant. It's weird because it has traditionally been geared towards old white guys, and I am well on my way to becoming an old white guy. I've already got 2 of the 3 qualifications down, and the 3rd one's coming. So to me, it wasn't a surprise that people, came together over it. It was a surprise that people used to not. So that was something that took some getting used to. But in the same way that, breaking bread with people, open a bottle with someone. You'll learn more about them, and you'll just walk a mile in their shoes, start getting along. So I talked a little bit about getting into the industry, and I said some not great things, and I said some kind of nice things. Do it. Like, if it's a passion, pursue it. Nothing in life is easy that's worth doing. So if you want it, go for it. It is achievable. So don't let anything I say turn you off of working in bourbon. Like, if you want to be a cooper, it's heavy. Like, barrels are heavy. It's hard work. It's hot work. Do it. If you want to distill, once again, it's very hot. Like, distills don't work on ice, right? They work on steam most of the time. It's hot. Do it. It's worth it.